Today we're here with my cousin Ale, and Ale is a beautiful artist who is not only someone that's inspired me in creative ways, but also has taught me that this newer generation is coming a lot smarter, a lot quicker, and a lot more profound than I could have imagined. So, welcome, Ale.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So I want to start this conversation asking you a question that I think a lot about when it comes to newer generations that come after me. It's when you think of your financial future, do you think of it in a hopeful way or do you think of it in a dreadful way?
I think I can speak for a lot of people in Gen Z when I say we think about it in a bit of a dreadful way. I think now there's a bit more of a tendency to, kind of be hopeful about what it can be, but also be realistic and understand that living costs are going up. A lot of my friends personally who maybe have already kind of graduated college, move in with their parents, they kind of stay with their parents for a bit longer. And since in general, the cost of living has kind of gone up, I think it's very difficult for people to go into college and then leave being kind of hopeful about it. The job market is a disaster. So I think for that reason, I would say it's a bit more on the dreadful side. Obviously, it changes for everyone, but I think they're kind of looking for hope, but on the dreadful side,
Yeah, that's actually interesting you say that, because I feel like anywhere I go, it's not just, you grew up in the US, I think that's good context, but even anywhere else you go, it just seems like that's the case. In Spain and anywhere I've been, it's just, I think that idea of inflation or the idea of the cost of living's going up, I think it's crazy, and it just makes me think of a stat that people throw around online of how back in the day, maybe like 30 years ago, or like our parents' generation, for them it was totally normal for like the guy or the male to go work and that be enough to provide for two.
Yeah.
And it's kind of crazy how now that's not the case. And that's why I find it interesting too. We can tie it into other things as well. But when I think about how we got here, right? Because sometimes it's very easy to point fingers at people who are here right now, but I think it's a systemic issue that people don't recognize. And I think about it often, how people are always looking for someone else to blame, like let's say maybe like rich people or corporations or different things, but in reality they never question the system that they're in or the structure in which they're dealing with.
Right.
So I think it's such an important topic, and that's why I just think it's so important to talk to you and to your generation and to the newer generation who actually would want a change and who actually can make it, right?
Yeah.
And I think one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about like this whole new generation of money, new generation of finance, is because you have this like light bulb moment when you realize like, wait, it's actually not the rich, it's not the corporations, it's not even the politicians, it's actually the system in which we operate, where this money is just being printed out of thin air, and it's kind of getting swept under the rug. And people don't realize that that's why this systemic issue has been going on for so long. So I'm excited to have this conversation because I think it's good to understand where people's reality is today.
Yeah.
And how we could actually help rebuild that future, right? How can we reshape that future that we want to see as this new generation? Everybody, not just a new generation, everybody. Yeah. So I think when I kind of want to go in a little bit to you as a person and as an artist. And what do you think about when you're, you want to be a singer, right? You're an artist, not only a singer, you also like write your own songs, and you have a more holistic approach to it. What do you think of in terms of your finances, or how you want to start that when it comes to money? Does money drive you? Do you see it as a limitation, or do you see that as like a driving force, something to look forward to?
It's a good question. I think as of now, I would say I'm in the privileged minority in the world of creativity, where I'm still a student, so I don't feel the incredible pressure that a lot of artists feel when it comes to making money from your art, you know, I still kind of like have that, I think, sacred sort of money hasn't really penetrated into my creative world yet, you know? Like it's something that I think about, but it's not something that I'm creating thinking about. But I will say I think it's interesting that you bring up the point of the money system, because I think I really hadn't understood that well what the actual system is currently until we had the conversation that we did a couple months ago. And I think a lot of people in my generation have naturally become a little bit more politically inclined ever since COVID and everything that's gone down. So I think in that way, I think I was kind of looking for a solution, but in my head, I was like, there's nothing. Like, there's actually nothing we can do because it's so ingrained in the system, right? And I think for that reason, I also kind of grouped together corporations, politicians, finance bros, and crypto bros all in one category. And I was like, these people are the problem. Like, they're only focused on money, you know? And I really never understood it until then. I kind of like asked you about it, and I think now, I mean, there's a huge difference between being 18 and being 20. I'm 20 now. And like now I would say I'm a bit more open-minded to that. Yeah. So I was like, I was just asking just out of curiosity, expecting to hear a similar answer. But then when you kind of explained it to me, it completely changed my outlook on it. And it kind of felt like, I guess, the systematic approach to a problem and a solution that I had kind of envisioned in my brain, you know? So I also would kind of love for you to re-explain it to me, like the problem and the solution in those terms, because I think a lot of people in Gen Z would really benefit from that kind of approach to it.
Yeah, I think I want to touch on one point, and then I'm going to explain exactly how that's impacted. I think it's totally normal, especially like even in like college areas and like just student life. It's always very interesting because you see groups of people who really want to make a change in the world, and you're getting into this age or this, let's say, this era in your life where you're kind of coming to your own and you're starting to realize, hey, I care about these things, and a lot of times you want to fix certain problems. And the way that we look to fix problems is always, you know, whatever just meets the eye first.
Right.
And I think the not so obvious approach sometimes is kind of looking within. And in this case, it's kind of looking within the system. And I always found it very, very interesting when people were like, for example, like, let's tax the rich, which I'm not saying there's anything wrong with, you know, some taxes for rich people and normal people. Or even like when people talk about like the wealth gap, I think that's such a, like for me, that's always like, if only people knew. I'm not saying that I'm always right, but it's very clear how the wealth gap a lot of the times is driven by inflation or by money printing. And I know these terms usually draw people off whenever people hear money printing, the Fed, rates, whatever. You don't need to understand all of that. What I think people need to understand is that the system we live in today, the best way I could describe it is maybe when I was young. I have an anecdote. We're from Venezuela, and Venezuela went through a very, very rapid case of hyperinflation. Mm-hmm. And the way that this hyperinflation played out was that at one point, let's say maybe $1 would get you 4 or 5 bolívares. And there was a point where I remember my dad asked me, he's like, look, like the bolívar just reached 6 or 7 or 8. And, you know, that's like 50% devaluation in our money and our things. Like, should we sell this to dollars? Should we like get out of this system? And I remember being naive. I was like 13. I was like, well, I don't know. I think it's going to come back down. Like, it's okay. And in a matter of months, it went from 4 or 5 to 1,000. That just means that if you had like, I don't know, $1,000 saved, that would be worth like a cent.
Yeah.
It's insane.
Yeah.
And then it just kept on going to the millions, and now it's actually at trillions. So if you had $1 that was worth 4 bolívares, that same dollar was worth trillions now, like 10 years later. So when you see that, you think, okay, well, this is insane, and you think that it's because you're in, a third world country or
Right.
something, because, the politics and all that, which in a way it is. It's the only reason that it happens faster. But what people don't realize is that our whole lives, we're young, and our parents are relatively young, and our grandparents as well, relative to the history of time. The last 100 years is the only time that fiat currencies have existed. So the traditional currency you see today, which is, let's say, the dollar, the yen, the euro, every country has their own currency. It's not backed by anything. If you go to these governments, like essentially what a dollar bill is a note, a piece of debt that says that if you go to the government and you turn it in, they're going to give you $1 worth of something. That's how it used to be. It used to be gold, and then it was gold and some silver, and then it was like, well, we only have a little bit of gold, and now it's like we don't have any gold to back it up. We're just giving you this piece of paper. So essentially, we're living in this imaginary world where we're trading pieces of paper with people that aren't really backed by anything tangible or anything, let's say, of real world value.
Yeah.
It's only based on trust. And that's why fiat currencies are so fragile, and why when you price a system, you price an economy, you price real things that you like rent, everything, you price it in a currency that someone else can just easily print, like if it was monopoly. And the even just to tie everything back in, the reason people feel what you were saying at the beginning, you were saying that like things get more expensive, you can't afford your home, you can't afford a lot of things. The reason people feel that is because the currency in which the system in which you're operating in is constantly being manipulated, or it's constantly being printed.
Yeah. And
you can't see it because you're pricing everything in that currency. So for example, when you buy a t-shirt or the sweater you bought, let's say you paid $20, $30. If that goes up in price, what people don't realize is when things go up in price, it's not necessarily that t-shirt is worth more or that sweater is worth more. It means that the currency that you're using is worth less. And it's something so subtle, but people don't grasp it because it's just hidden under the rug. It's just subtly in there when you're pricing things in currencies that, are just, but because there wasn't an option, right? Like the last 50, 60 years, we came into this digital age and we needed digital money. And the only way to digitize money was fiat currencies because they were easy to digitize. And I think the best way I could describe the system is it's based on trust. And when you base off of trust and you have a government who's in charge of that trust, a lot of the times they're only going to do what's best in their own interests. And it's kind of anyone. It's not just to blame a specific person. When you're put in a position of power, you want to, gain influence, or you want to do certain things. And maybe you agree, maybe you don't agree. But essentially, you're kind of giving all that trust away.
Right.
And a lot of times they tend to break it. And, in an ideal world where everybody is, like the most honest person and they generally want what's good for everyone, then that would be a little bit different. But I think the biggest way I could describe it is you're operating in a system that requires you to trust someone else, to be financially literate and financially responsible in a world where what happens is you're just incentivizing debt, you're incentivizing growth, you're incentivizing all these things, and you think they're good things, but in reality, the way that it affects you is things go up in price for you.
Right.
Yeah, and yeah, it's just a system that's kind of working against you. And for example, just to kind of creep into the crypto or the Bitcoin side, because I know a lot of people are against it, or not against it. They're very resistant to it because they tie a lot of like meme coins,
right,
and I don't know, like just pump and dumps and just a lot of things that are just make money quick or get rich quick schemes. And there's a lot of those. And that's why I separate Bitcoin and then crypto. And I think the best way to describe why Bitcoin is hope for this new generation is because it's a system that doesn't require you to trust any group of people, whether you're a Republican, a Democrat, or whatever country you're in, like one side or the other. It kind of allows you to opt out of this system that's working against you.
Yeah.
And it's like a vote against this current system. And it's like the most peaceful way to protest something that's affecting you so much. And that's why I think it's so powerful. It's like a peaceful protest out of a system that's working against you. And just to finish up that point, the way that I can best describe Bitcoin is when I save in Bitcoin, my life gets cheaper. And when I save in fiat, my life gets more expensive.
Right.
because I'm changing the currency that I'm pricing my world in. And it's very subtle, it's very simple, but it's a game changer.
So for people in Gen Z who kind of hear this and are like, this is something that I asked you as soon as
Yeah.
you explained it to me, and I was like, I like this. Like, where do I start? Like, what do I do? How would you approach that question?
It's a good question because every person uses Bitcoin for a different reason.
Right.
You'd think it's just a one-sided thing, but it's just like anything. You could approach it in different ways for different purposes. You, for example, are in a very specific situation, and there's somebody who's an accountant and they just work a 9 to 5, and that's totally fine. They just want to find a way to save money that buys them more over time, right? And I think the best way to get started is like the boring way, but in reality, it's just learning. But I would say take a different approach and not learning via, I'm going to watch 1,000 hours of YouTube videos and things like this. Like maybe you could. And I think that's also smart. But sometimes it's getting enough knowledge for you to feel comfortable trying something out. At the end of the day, like you can learn about a lot of theory, a lot of things, but until you don't live it or experience it yourself, you're not really going to feel the impact of what I'm talking about. And what's happening here is, if you go and start looking at content today about what are cryptocurrencies today, you're not going to get the full grasp of what's to come. Because the most exciting thing about what's happening today isn't what exists today, it's what's going to come tomorrow.
Right.
And the future we're building. And if you're going to learn about it, I think the first thing you need to do is learn enough so you understand how this is going to impact you in the future. And second, just buy a little Bitcoin and hold it for years. You just buy enough to hold a couple of years and see for yourself what I'm talking about. It's very simple. I'm not going to tell people to do, all these things and learn how to trade. That's I think the worst thing you can do. It's just learn a little bit, just enough so you feel comfortable buying some, hold a little bit, and you'll see over time how your life gets a little cheaper. Yeah. So I know it's a bit like tough to start with because people always feel like, oh, it's so technical. Like I don't know where to get started, or like, people have these misconceptions, right? Where they're just like, they think, even my family, like people in my family, like I've been doing this for 8 years. They still ask me like, oh, they only ask me when the price goes up. Oh, should I buy now? When the price goes down and I'm kind of talking about it, they're just like, no, I'm buying whatever token or I don't know, AI stock or something. But there's a lot of misconceptions when it comes to what learning and actually getting involved means, because people think you have to become a trader and then you have to, trade and buy and sell, buy low and sell high, and then, timing the market. In reality, it's not about like timing the market, it's about the time in the market. That's like a saying.
That's a good distinction.
Yeah, it's a good saying, even with stocks or everything and investing. I just think people think that it has to be this complicated thing, and it's really not. And I would say, if you get stuck in the whole trading and meme coins and like getting rich quick, even if you make some money quickly, you're not really understanding how this future is changing and how you can either own a piece of it or be a part of it. And I think that's something important. And I was actually going to ask, like, in general with people, Gen Z, I know you said like people have these misconceptions, or they have a certain, let's say, perspective or the way they see like crypto bros or finance bros. Do you think it has a lot to do with this, like this idea of like people who just want to get rich quick, or they're kind of scammy? Or is this more of like, it's just like annoying people who some of them make some money and they're just super annoying about it? Or what do you think is like the reason why they see you?
I think it's mostly a scammy thing. Okay. Like I think once the world of kind of like NFTs came to be, I think it's a mix of feeling like it's scammy and not understanding what it is. And I think in a lot of ways that kind of overlaps, right? Because like if you don't understand something, it's much more likely that you won't like believe in it. You know what I mean? So I think for that reason, I think a lot of people in Gen Z are not really, I don't know, I wouldn't say that they're not open to the idea, but I think also the way in which crypto content, I think, is made usually is a little bit more like geared towards people in crypto, you know what I mean? Like, I think they'd be more videos that like my dad would watch instead of like, he's like very interested in the whole economic world and all that. But for that reason, even me, who's like, I'm very interested in all things economy, but also politics and all that stuff. I wouldn't say that I ever found a creator on TikTok or on Instagram or anything that I was like, oh wow, I really want to listen to what they have to say. And then when I had the one-on-one conversation with you, that's when I really kind of understood it.
Yeah.
And I think even then in that conversation, to touch on a point that you were talking about earlier, I think even then I was still thinking about it in terms of dollars. So I was like, okay, I understand that this is going to be like a big thing, right? So how much can I make from this realistically, right? But then I think once we fully finished that conversation, I kind of understood that it's less of, you're saying time in the market, it's less of putting the money down and like watching it grow. It's more of like putting the money in or like buying Bitcoin in order to kind of buy into what it can be, you know?
Yeah, just to even say that, one of the things we say, when I say we, I mean like Bitcoiners, is you're not buying Bitcoin, you're selling fiat. And that's such an important distinction, because when you see it as in like, when you start seeing it for what it is, like when I see fiat currencies, I see a melting ice cube, right? Like when people have cash in their accounts, apart from the fact that your money is not even in the bank because they're lending it out, which is another topic, even if they had all of it there, it's just literally melting over time. Every time the government decides, I want to go finance a war anywhere else in the world, I want to go finance whatever dumb or smart thing that they want to do, they actually finance it mostly via money printing, not just taxes. And essentially, by you holding fiat currencies, you're financing that for them. And that's why I say holding Bitcoin is like a peaceful protest. It's a peaceful way out of a system it's like your life raft out of a system, and like the sinking Titanic, you're like getting a life raft out of there. Imagine the Titanic was sinking slowly though. Let's say in the case of like the dollar or whatever, like the more traditional ones. But it's also interesting what you were mentioning about the distinction of how people see crypto bros or whatever as scammy. Even something that people don't know, the biggest critics of crypto bros are Bitcoin bros.
Really?
Yeah, so people don't know this. Like when you're in this space, it's like with anything, even I guess within the industries, everything within, it's usually like your closest neighbor who's like probably like, you know, your biggest rival, let's say. But I wouldn't say it's a rivalry. I think a lot of people in the Bitcoin space, myself included, are very, very, very weary of, there's so many random coins. And all this is a new technology that allows for the tokenization, or like, let's say, allows you to kind of expand your possibilities. Just see it as a technology that allows you to expand your possibilities globally and allow you to accrue value in a tokenized way by building communities or by building, let's say, a cult.
Right.
And a lot of, obviously, pump and dumps and people who want to scam you are really good at that. And they're just taking this technology and using it for themselves. But people, I hate how they relate. What I hate about it is how, and what I think most people in the Bitcoin space hate about it, is that they hate that Bitcoin, which is something so revolutionary and something that's so good for the world, in my opinion, and it just provides this hope, is tied into the same circle as like these pump and dump coins and just like dog coins, and you're just like you do you. I don't think it should be illegal. Like you do you, but this is something completely different, and that's why people say this is Bitcoin. It's not crypto. So I think one misunderstanding that a lot of Gen Z, or even anyone, not even Gen Z, like everyone that I talk to has this, they just see crypto and they just think about it in that way. And I think that's one thing to talk about. And then the second thing that you were mentioning is, I think a lot of people, or most people, when they think about cryptocurrencies and getting involved, it's like they feel like they have to learn more than you really need to learn. Like I'll give you an example. When you started using the dollar, who taught you about the dollar? Most people don't even know what the dollar is made of. They just used it because everyone else used it, right? Yeah. So it's essentially a social contract or a social construct that we all decide, like, hey, we're going to use this because that's what it benefits most of us, right? Mm-hmm. But when I tell people, like, look, I don't need you to learn all these different, you can. That's why people think it's so complicated, but the fact that you can even learn about it in such a simple way, there's 21 million Bitcoin. No one will ever create more than that. Since the first year it was created, there was 0. Every year after that, every 4 years after that, the amount that gets issued daily gets cut in half until you get to the 21 million in 2140. that might sound a little complicated, but in reality, it's such a simple like framework for a monetary system that if I were to explain to you how the dollar is created today, we would need like 5 different podcasts, 5 different conversations just to talk about it.
Right.
And we still wouldn't get to the thick of it. So I think when I tell people, it's like, hey, look, you didn't really need to understand this system. The only thing you can understand is that it either works for you or it doesn't. And this system clearly doesn't work for people because your life gets more expensive. You're kind of allowing governments to finance things that you didn't even vote for, you know? And it's clearly a system that's not working for you. And with Bitcoin, all I'm telling people is try it out. See for yourself. Buy some Bitcoin, hold it for a couple of years. Don't get caught in the trading and thinking that like short-term mindset. Only buy an amount that you're willing to like hold for a couple of years, maybe 3-5 years. You'll see what I'm talking about.
When we talked about the social aspects of Bitcoin, I think that was like the part that was most interesting to me.
Okay.
As someone who's like very, I guess, feels very strongly about social issues.
Totally.
And you explained to me how you see Bitcoin operating in other parts of the world and how that could benefit people in other parts of the world.
Completely.
I would love for you to like kind of touch on that a little bit.
Yeah. So that's why it's such a deeper topic. Your question hits the nail on the head on when people are so worried about how much you're going to make in dollar terms or how much, like, how are you going to get rich quick? For people like you and other people who genuinely, I mean, I think most people care about other people in the world, but sometimes we get stuck in our own worlds. But when you think about other people in the world and their realities, you think about people in developing countries, right? People who maybe don't have the same opportunities as everyone else. So these people have kind of been secluded out because they don't have the same infrastructure. Obviously, the politics kind of affects them. Venezuela included.
Yeah.
Venezuela, which is, we have the largest oil reserves in the world. How are we not richer than Saudi? Not richer, but just as rich, you know? And when I say rich, I don't mean like, you know, just spending hundreds of millions on soccer players. I mean like actual infrastructure, actual security, actually, you know, like people feel like they can build a future for themselves. You have so much resources. And the reason is very simple. You have governments who essentially, you know, kind of, they're corrupt or they do what they need to do. And you know, that's obviously very, very shameful. But what I see Bitcoin as hopeful, or why I think it's so powerful, is because if you see in most countries that are either dictatorships or something that's suppressing their population, the most effective way for them to suppress their population is actually to cut the money supply off, meaning cut any way for them to exchange that government-issued currency for something else that's actually going to hold its value.
Yeah.
So, for example, in Venezuela, one of the things they had was they had like price controls or money controls where you could only exchange bolivares to dollars if you asked them for permission, and only people who were like friends with the government could do that, not like just anyone. Or for example, in Nigeria and different places, you see how the first thing they do is just cut off any way for you to leave that currency because they know it'll fall like this as soon as people realize like, hey, I don't trust this government anymore. Bitcoin's so powerful because you have this digital, borderless currency that's immutable, meaning that no government can just come and then just stop.
Right.
And global currency that anybody can access by just connecting to internet and having a smartphone. So, of course, that's a little simplified because there are ways where governments can make it a little harder for people, but you have this way where you can, if you don't agree with the government, if you're in Venezuela, for example, and you had your savings in real estate, because that's the only way you could actually hold some value instead of having the currency. If you want to get up and go, like 9 million people did in Venezuela, what happens? You just get up and go, and maybe you'll be able to sell your apartment or whatever real estate property you had. And that's only if you were actually like really like fortunate enough to even own real estate because you had savings. You get up and go and you have to figure out how to sell that later. You're just like, I need to go, I need to flee.
Yeah.
If you would have just been holding Bitcoin, all you need is to just remember some words or take a little device, or all you have to do is remember 12, 24 words and you go. And we saw this in Ukraine when people fled the war, people fled with crypto, or like anywhere else, even in Gaza actually with the whole situation. And when you think about like how powerful that is, it's not so much if everyone does it or not. It's the fact that you have the opportunity or a way out keeps governments in check. And I think that's so powerful because, for example, in the Venezuela scenario, like if in that scenario, let's say you would have leave Venezuela with your Bitcoin, well, not only forget about the idea that Bitcoin just appreciated a lot in price in the last 10 years or 5 years. Just the idea that you can take your wealth anywhere you go in the world is so important, and it's so crucial because it just allows you to just peacefully remove yourself from situations where otherwise you would have just had to lose all your money. And it kind of takes a little bit of the power away from governments, because since they're the ones who issue the currency, they're essentially, every time they print money, the way you finance something and the way governments finance things is you have something you want to do. You want to finance a war, right? Before, back in the day, they had to go knocking on everybody's door saying, hey, we have a war, you need to pay your taxes, right? There was the tax collectors. And then they were very sly about it because people realized, I mean, we had a whole revolution in the US, the Tea Party movement, because they were charging taxes. But nowadays, they found a way that was more like just a simpler way, a more slick way to do it is, well, before they had to have X amount of gold, and it was real gold, but now they just have a currency they can just print. And we're giving it value because we decide to accept it. But the moment that governments say, you know what, like, I'm not going to tell them, I'm just going to print some more money and I'm going to finance this stuff, that's a way of them taxing you, and like, without having to go to your door and ask you for it, and without your approval. And by you opting out of that system and holding Bitcoin, you're telling them, no, if you're going to take my money, you have to come to my door and ask me for my money to finance whatever you want to finance, but you're not going to do it behind my back. And that's very powerful. And that's powerful everywhere in the world. That's not just the US, everywhere in the world. So
I think it's important that you bring up the point of like governments and then their kind of connection to currency and the idea of control. Because I think this was one of the first questions I actually asked you. Like the idea of, I think you hear Bitcoin and you hear this as like this, wow, this is such an interesting, good sort of way forward. But then you're like, okay, what if someone takes control of it and then the same cycle kind of repeats itself, right? But you explained it to me in very simple terms, so I feel like...
Yeah, this is a good one. Because when people think of decentralization or the centralization of power, today when people talk about like the rich or the wealthy, or, you know, in the system that we have today, the people who have the most money have the most power over that same system. I'm not saying that with Bitcoin, the people who have more Bitcoin essentially have more power, not within the system, but just with people. You know, you can buy things you want, you can, you know, pay for things that like maybe other people can't. But the centralization of power that we're talking about is who makes a decision of how much money you can print and how the system works. In Bitcoin's case, no one can just come, no matter how much Bitcoin you have, you can't just come and change how everything works. And there's not 21 million now, there's 50 million Bitcoin, and I'm going to take all of them for me. Like it's not correlated with the more Bitcoin you have, the more voting power you have. That's actually not how that works. It's actually a social consensus. So if you're a participant in the network, your vote is worth just as much as someone else. And I know it sounds like utopian, or, you know, but in reality, it is definitely more democratic than the system we have today. And just to reiterate, the more Bitcoin you have doesn't mean you have more power over the network. Of course, you have more resources, so maybe you can try to have more influence with other people, but other people's voice counts. And that's why it's such a revolutionary topic, because the distribution of power is decentralized. It's not in one place. There's not one government that's powerful that can just change how Bitcoin works. There's not 10 governments that are just so powerful that change how Bitcoin works. There's no one entrepreneur like Elon Musk can't just come and change Bitcoin. Donald Trump can't come and change Bitcoin. And that's why it's so powerful, because I think, and it's not to vilify anyone, it's just the reality. No matter how powerful or how big people seem, you can't change this system. But it's something that like gets kind of like caught in the weeds, because I know we're used to a system where maybe the more money you have, it seems like you have more influence over a system. So I think that's why it's so powerful. It's like a bottom-up approach.
And that's because of the way that Bitcoin is structured now.
Yeah, exactly. So just simply put, Bitcoin is what's called a distributed ledger. Imagine you had an Excel sheet, and anyone who wanted a copy of it can have a copy of it. Like you have Google Sheets or like an Excel, and then like you can log in and you can see who has what everywhere. It's all public. And you have your own copy. You can decide to have your own copy.
It's public?
It's public. Everything's public. That's
in Bitcoin?
Yeah, everything.
Wow.
Everything is public in Bitcoin. What's not public is like who owns what, right? It's just
right.
It's just it's pseudonymous in a way, or like anonymous, where you see every wallet that exists and how much money there is and what's transferred at what time, but you don't know who owns what.
Wow.
So it's an interesting thing. So everybody in the world who wants access to that copy of everything has access to it. So it's called a distributed ledger. And the ledger is essentially, like who owns what and who's sending to who. And what makes it so distributed and so decentralized is people who are enforcing or verifying that everything is in check and everything works. It's like tens of thousands of computers online that are constantly verifying transactions. And if there was only one computer, well, that's very centralized because they can just change how things work and no one else is validating that it's wrong. But if you have tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, and eventually millions of computers or people verifying these transactions or verifying that this is all like, what we say it is, then it becomes a lot more honest. It's like if you had, 100,000 participants saying like, hey, no, this checks off, this doesn't. And it's interesting because there's no collusion because it's like computers don't really know each other. They're just validating what's sent to them. So it's just distributed and decentralized because anybody can have a copy of it and verify transactions, and they're consistently checking with others around them saying, hey, we all have the same things. Okay, great. And if one person tries to change how something works, then everybody's going to notice, because if you got a copy from 10 different computers and one of them sent the wrong one, we're like, hey, no, all these other ones don't match with yours, so no. And then it just, imagine this, but in like very, very huge scale of like distribution.
So it's like algorithmic. It's more, instead of like someone having full control over it.
This is that you're hitting the nail there. 100%. You're choosing. Do I want a math-based system or an algorithmic-based system where I know exactly what the rules of the game are? I know how everything works. Maybe it's not perfect, but I know exactly what I'm getting into, or something else that says it's just a black box. You're trusting a person or a group of people who are usually politically oriented on one side that you might agree with and you might not agree with. And 100% of the times, they've proven to create a system that works against you. And that's just the reality. So you're choosing a math-based system.
What do you say to people who feel like maybe, or even young people who feel like putting money into Bitcoin not to invest is kind of like losing out on their money? Okay.
You're asking like when someone like, can you repeat that? Like when someone's deciding
so
to invest?
Instead of investing in Bitcoin, like in the traditional sense, like in the stock market, what do you say to people who wouldn't want to kind of take the other approach and literally buy Bitcoin and own it themselves because they think that they're kind of losing out on it? Does that make sense?
So they're losing out on investing on something else, you mean?
Yes.
So like people who wouldn't want to buy Bitcoin because they think they prefer investing in another stock that's going to do better than Bitcoin? Is that what you mean?
So there's like the two sides of it, right? Either you put money into kind of like a fund that buys Bitcoin versus owning the Bitcoin yourself.
Gotcha. Yeah, like
and
self-custody.
So that feels a bit safer because also you see it go up, go down, whatever, and you feel like you're just investing, right? But then in another case, you kind of just have your money there, like you spend your regular like dollars, fiat currency, right? And then do you see?
I know what you mean. Yeah, it's definitely a fiat way to buy Bitcoin, and like we have this saying of like, that's so fiat. Like it's just funny. I don't know. It's a very niche thing, but it's just like that's a great question, and it's actually deeper than people might imagine, because one of the beauties of Bitcoin is you actually can hold your own money. You don't have to trust anyone else. So you can hold it, like not physically, but in the digital sense, physically, like yourself. You can have ownership over it, like true ownership. And why that's so important compared to, I'll break down the different ways you can actually own Bitcoin. And it doesn't mean that one's right or wrong. Everybody has different reasons for doing it. Yeah. You just have to understand the differences. And I think with Bitcoin specifically, you can buy, the most convenient way that you can buy Bitcoin today is if you already have a brokerage account. So you have, let's say, like a Fidelity account or Charles Schwab, Robinhood, like any app that you use to buy stocks, you can easily buy what's called a Bitcoin ETF. So essentially, it's just, this is like this product that like these institutions created where you can buy Bitcoin as the same way you buy a stock, but you don't actually own the Bitcoin. You own the rights to a certain amount of Bitcoin that you bought. So for example, you bought $100 or $1,000 worth of that ETF. You have the rights to $1,000 worth of Bitcoin. Yeah. But that's very fiat denominated, like you said. And they take a fee, but they hold it for you. And you can never actually hold that Bitcoin yourself You're always just holding a piece of paper that says, hey, I own X amount of
Right.
Bitcoin. So of course, yeah, you have the investment, you can make money with it. Of course, you can make money. You can make fiat with it. Great. But the thing is, you're also relying on that same system that's also flawed. We didn't touch on it yet, but the idea of like, you're trusting a third party to hold something for you, and you can trust that they're holding it for you. But we've seen time and time before that a lot of these institutions, they might not be holding it, or they might be selling you something that they sold 10 other people, the same thing.
Yeah.
So I think the pros of doing an ETF is, if you don't want to hold your own Bitcoin because it does have some responsibilities, and you're just in it because you want to make a quick buck, or you want to just benefit financially in a fiat denominated way, all power to you. I think that's also something that everybody's entitled to, and I think why not? Is it better than nothing? Yes. But you're not going to get the full power of Bitcoin, because if you're in the US or you're somewhere else, if you were to have a problem like what we said in Venezuela or whatever, the government can just freeze your assets. Easy. You said something that they don't like, you have an opinion they don't like, essentially they can freeze your assets. So it's not actually true Bitcoin.
Yeah.
You're just buying like a wrapper of it. And why it's important to buy, that's like the cons, right? That they charge you a fee, you're trusting someone else, and that it's easily freezable or confiscatable. So you're not really buying Bitcoin, you're just buying the investment piece of Bitcoin, like you said. And I think the other important side is why you should buy actual Bitcoin is you can easily buy it today. It's really not that hard, like downloading Coinbase, Robinhood, Kraken, like there's so many exchanges, or even Binance. There's so many exchanges where you can buy Bitcoin. And a mistake that people usually make is that they leave it on the exchange. Why do they leave it on the exchange? Because we're so used to other people holding our things for us that we don't take responsibility for it. We don't even doubt, like, hey, is that actually there? Or hey, this is even mine?
Yeah.
But why that's so important to actually take it out is because what if that same thing that you bought, they sold it to 10 other people? And we saw this before. It happened to FTX. I don't know if you heard of the crypto exchange, and the guy with the curly hair he looked like a genius, but it turns out he was just like defrauding a bunch of people. That's what he did. He was essentially selling Bitcoin to people. But like, since people didn't take it out, well, no one really knew that he didn't really have that Bitcoin there. And it's kind of your way of putting a check on the system as well. When you withdraw it out, it's like, okay, this is mine. And an example I usually give is like, imagine you buy like a really nice watch online, right? You bought like a Rolex, not even a Rolex, any watch. You bought it online. And imagine you bought that watch for investment purposes. You think it's going to go up, whatever, great. Imagine if you bought that watch, but you told them, hey, you know what? Don't ship it to me, just keep it there. How do you know that watch that you bought is actually yours? It's actually real, and that they didn't do that same thing with 5 other people who also just wanted someone to hold it for them? Wouldn't you want to receive that watch and be like, okay, this is real. Hey, this is mine. I'll hold it here. It's fine. Or I'll use it for whatever I want to use it.
They're relying on the fact that the people aren't going to want to,
So I'm not saying that these like crypto exchanges are acting in this way. I actually think a lot of them are more honest now, especially after a lot of things. But a saying we have is don't trust, verify. And that's such a beautiful thing about Bitcoin. With the current system, you can't verify anything. You can't go and audit a bank. You can't go and audit the Federal Reserve. You can't go and audit a lot of things. But with Bitcoin, it's very easy. It's all public. And especially when you withdraw that crypto or that Bitcoin to your wallet, well, you verified it yourself.
So how much would you say in terms of a lot of people in Gen Z, I would say, don't really have savings, but if they were to put any type of money into it, like what would be ideal? Like not in terms of amount, but in terms of, you know what I mean? Like percentage.
I think, look, I'll start by saying that I understand most people are in debt. It's not even that they don't have savings. Most people are in debt. So first of all, like, don't be in debt. Of course, that's very easy for me to say. I'm saying like, of course, holding Bitcoin I think is great and everything, but like getting out of debt is just like a priority. Especially if you have credit card debt, which is it's crazy. It's like eating up into your future. But I would say more importantly than how much Bitcoin you buy is if you start grasping this concept of, hey, the system is changing. There's one system that's working against me, which is like the fiat currency system, the currency we use today. And there's another system that works for me. It's not so much how much are you going to buy of it, is how can I use this system to help me push forward and to get me ahead where I want to be. So if, for example, you have a job, right? Why do a lot of people feel like they need to spend all this money. A lot of people get into debt or they get a job and they spend more than they need to. And the reason they do that is because, first of all, we have this social, pressure of like, I need to have a good car, I need to have a good shirt, a watch, and this and that, and the shoes and the traveling. And, you kind of buy a lot of things that you feel like you don't need. But I think a lot of this nihilism or a lot of this, approach that people have is actually a very fiat thing. It's not so grounded because money is so easy to spend. It's a credit-based system. It's a system that just incentivizes you to borrow money. It's cheap. It's a very artificial system. It makes it really easy for you to just spend money that you don't have.
Yeah.
So it kind of gets you locked into this death spiral where you think it's so easy. Oh yeah, I can just buy this car. But the only reason you can afford it is because they make it so artificially cheap for you to do that because they want you to get into debt. So the way that I would get involved with Bitcoin to work for you is, first of all, realize that you have a system that works for you. And by working whatever job you have and realizing, hey, you know what, I do have hope. If I do save this amount, I know over time it's going to buy me more. So I feel more incentivized to actually save and to spend a little less and, live a little below my means now so that in the future, with this, I can actually buy more over time. So if let's say you make, I don't know, $2,000, $3,000 a month and you spend $2,000, I know these are just arbitrary numbers, I don't know. Let's say you make $3,000 a month and you can find a way to spend $2,500 a month and you can save that $500 a month and put it into Bitcoin every month. It seems like little today. You think, oh, that's not going to benefit my future and like whatever. And that's why a lot of people end up buying like meme coins or a lot of like speculative things or buying the lottery or gambling because they just feel so hopeless about their future that they just feel like they have to make it all quickly. But in reality, this compounding effect that you're going to have, which you already have in fiat-denominated investments like the S&P 500, but Bitcoin is just like a supercharger to that. So if you're really consistent with, I'm going to save X amount a month, and I'm going to put it into Bitcoin, and over time you let it do its thing. Let it show you not how much money you made, it's how much cheaper things get for you in a Bitcoin-denominated way.
Right.
You see the price of an iPhone, the price of a home. That's something I always tell people. Stop looking at it in fiat. 5 years ago, if you wanted to buy like a normal average US household, it would have cost maybe $350,000 or $400,000. And 5 years later, it costs almost $600,000, $500,000, around there. So it gets more expensive. Your life gets more expensive. But in a Bitcoin denominated way, it was around, let's say 40, 50 Bitcoin 5 years ago. And now it's 5 Bitcoin, 4 Bitcoin. And buying 4 or 5 Bitcoin now seems like a lot because that's like a lot of money. But in the future, it's going to go down and down and down over time. It's a deflationary currency. So understand the hope that Bitcoin brings you. Find a way to live below your means so that you can opt into this system. Even if mentally, even if you're not even in monetarily, mentally, if you're in the system, you're already at a benefit. And if you can find a way to really opt in via your own time and your resources, that's the best way to store your time. I'm going to add this anecdote because I think it's important. People don't realize people spend around like 40,000 hours their whole life, maybe more, maybe less, but they spend tens of thousands of hours working for a currency or a money that they don't understand. They don't even spend 100 or 1,000 hours learning how to keep it or how to help it grow or questioning, am I really using the right currency?
Yeah.
And if you just spend a couple hours understanding it, you realize like, I can't be. That's why a lot of people say cash is trash and all this stuff. So spending a little time to just kind of learning what you're opting into is going to be so powerful. So yeah.
So I think a lot of people in Gen Z also, I think, stray away from, but need to kind of understand a bit more about how to manage their finances. And I think we were kind of mentioning this. You're talking about how we live in a credit-based society economy.
Yeah.
And this might be a bit off topic, but I think it would be interesting to kind of get into the credit versus debit debate because not to debate us, but because as someone who's kind of on the cusp of Gen Z and Millennial, I think you probably have a very particular outlook on it.
Yeah, that's a deeper question because I think as someone who spends with a credit card, right? Like I want to humble myself down here. I'm not like some, like there's a guy called Dave Ramsey. He's super like anti-debt.
I know.
And like I respect, Dave. Yeah. So like it's interesting because that's the contradictory side of it. Because Dave actually, he hates Bitcoin. Dave Ramsey hates Bitcoin.
Really?
Yeah, he's super anti-Bitcoin, but it's actually so aligned with him in ways he doesn't even know. I think, I know I've probably tried to explain it to him, but I think credit versus debit I realize more and more over time, when they make it so easy for you to spend with a credit card, that it's easy for you to forget. Like
Right.
it really feeds into this procrastination mindset we have of like, I'll just figure that out later. And like, since you can roll over your balance and people do, I don't do that. And I'd suggest no one does. Like, I know a lot of people
Yeah.
roll over the balance because they don't want to pay it off, and like
Yeah.
just pay it off because it's really bad. Like how much they charge you in interest rates. It seems so little. They just charge you a couple fees and you think, it's not that much in dollar terms, but percentage wise, it's a lot. It's make it so easy for you to spend that it really feeds into this procrastination, like it's okay, like whatever, it's so easy, like you have it, it feels like you have it. Like if you have a credit card limit of like 10K, you can spend the 10K and feel like it's yours, and it's not really yours. The debit side is like, it's just a lot more friction because maybe it's not as easy to spend, and also you can very clearly see when they take money from your account, it's like, okay, damn, like I just, and I don't, they actually it hurts a little more, right? It feels like you're taking cash and giving it to someone. But I'm really thinking heavily into just kind of spending with a debit card and just forgetting about it. Yeah, I'll take like, I'm not going to earn 3%. Sorry?
Spending with a credit card and just forgetting about it?
No, spending with a debit card.
Oh, you meant that.
So the
wow.
reason, so the reason I would spend with a debit card, or it just, I was talking about it with a friend yesterday, and he was like, I feel you, man, but that's such a virgin move, bro. Like it just feels, you feel like such a virgin spending with a debit card, like a 15-year-old, and it's like, I get it. It's just so much like on my mind. It's just like, I know I won't spend more than I need to. And I think I'm pretty responsible, but I think for most people, it's like, I know people in like deep debt. It's like, you don't have that money. Why are you spending it? You know, but obviously it's easier said than done. And I think I want to find a balance with it because I do like earning points. And this is a gamified system. They gamify the system.
I think that's the allure for a lot of people. With the
airport lounges and, like the miles, and you can, upgrades and, even cashback. Like cashback is like, why not? It's free money.
Yeah, exactly.
But I would argue that you are like, so I'll give you an example, very simple. I think I have the Robinhood credit card that gives me 3% cashback. I love it, right? But in reality, if you were to ask me, do you think I spend more than 3% of the amount I would if I was using a debit card? And I tell you 100%. I think people spend more than 20 or 30% of what they actually would if they spent with a debit card, which automatically offsets any points, any cashback that you would have had.
Yeah.
So that's why I think it's such a system, it's such a flawed system, but obviously like people, you're opt in, it's like no one's forcing you to do it.
Yeah.
As opposed to the other one. So I think, I'm really considering just sucking it up. No points, no nothing. Like I'll just, we'll see. I don't know. How do you see it? Do you think, how's been your experience with, I don't know if you have a credit card or a debit card?
I have both.
Okay.
I have both. I would say I didn't want to get into the world of credit cards, to be honest. Even when I was 18, like the first thing, I was kind of a bit deep in finance TikTok.
Yeah.
And everyone was like, you need to get a credit card as soon as, what's one thing you would tell your 18-year-old self? And it's like, open a credit card right now, like whatever, like start building your credit, whatever.
There we go.
And I think a lot of my friends also have credit cards, mostly because of the cashback and because of the points, right? And then eventually I gave in and I got the Chase Freedom Unlimited.
Okay.
And
shout out Chase.
Chase is and it freaked me out. Like I still use it, but I would say I think also there's just, I mean, this goes for college or for anything once you turn 18, 19, whatever. They kind of throw you in the deep end and they're like, figure it out, like what you have to do. And for that reason, I think it's even easier for people my age to be kind of in credit card debt, because it's not only you're spending the things that you don't have, but more so you're using the credit card in the wrong way, right? I didn't know anything about, like, I understand the credit limit, but I didn't really know anything about credit card usage, the percentage, how that affects your credit score,
That's on
the
purpose,
day that you pay it back. And it's like, they don't have these rules. They just give the card to you and it's very easy. And I think for that, it's also kind of catered towards people who don't really know much about it. And so I've had to learn over time through trial and error. And now I know how much to spend at what point to, you know what I mean? But it's like no one teaches you these things, and it's very easy to kind of get caught in that. So for that reason, now I see it as something that's really dangerous. If used right, it's fine. Yeah. But as something that it could cause a lot of damage, and it does cause a lot of damage to people even my age, like spending money that they don't have. So I don't know. It's something that I'm still also considering. Like I do prefer the security of of a debit card
Yeah.
much more than I do of a credit card, you know?
You know, it's interesting you said the credit score. That's another one. It's the cashback points, and they get you with the credit
Yes.
score. But think about it like this. They want you to build a, when I say they, I'm not trying to be like, oh, it's the Illuminati or it's some conspiracy theory. Like, if it is, I don't know. I'm not like a conspiracy theorist. But when I say they, I mean like the system kind of incentivizes you, right? So like build your credit score, right? So that you can then borrow money. Like
Yeah.
they want you to think about this. They want you to take on debt, meaning like use a credit card so that you can build a system that allows you to take on more debt, but
Yeah.
you just want privileged
Yeah.
debt that's a little bit cheaper, right?
Yeah.
I'm not saying debt necessarily is bad. Consumer debt is bad. Obviously, investment debt is good if you do it correctly, right? Like it's just a balance of those two
Yeah.
things. But obviously, everybody when you're taking on a credit card, that's usually consumer. No one's really investing with their credit card. And if you want to build a credit score, usually it's people so that they can buy a car with the like,
Exactly.
you know. So it's that loops you into this whole system. And when I talk about a system, it's not just fiat currencies. It's like the whole system itself is a credit-based system. It kind of forces you into like you're just like this zombie, and it's like, yeah, like I have to like build my credit, and then I have to do this, and then like you're just like playing in this system where even though you think it's working for you, wow, look at all these things I can buy. It's not making you any richer in terms of like, I love this saying that's like, the rich isn't the one who has the most, but the one who needs the least.
Right.
And it's just this idea of like, we really don't need all these things, and we're just getting looped and thrown into a system where we're kind of shown like, hey, you should have this nice car, and why wouldn't you pay $700 for just a nicer car like a BMW or whatever?
Right.
You know, like even I know this is very specific to the U.S. and not like other countries, but even in other countries, like that have access to debt, they can kind of feel the same way, and it's all part of this structure of like, why don't you spend more? Why don't you do more? And it's like if you had a currency or you had a money where you felt like, you know what, maybe I'll hold on to this because I think it'll buy me more of my needs over time. You'll be a little more grounded. And I just think I'll put it this way: we work so many hours, like I said, we work so much time for a currency that we don't even know how it works. But what you do know is that you invest time, which is the most important currency. Like more than Bitcoin, more than anything,
Yeah.
it's your time.
Yeah.
Right? Your time. And then when you get paid for your time, your efforts, or your work, you're kind of storing your time or your energy into something.
Mm-hmm.
And you decide where you store it. You can store it into a currency that's constantly melting. That's why it feels so like harsh. That things get more expensive and you work more and more. It just doesn't add up. But with Bitcoin, it's like you work all this time, you work these hours, and it feels fulfilling that you can store it into something that you know over time will, you know, hopefully buy you more, right?
Yeah.
You're storing your time, you're storing your energy into something that's actually worthwhile. And I think once we opt into the system, I think you feel a little more incentivized knowing that like, you know what, maybe I don't have to spend on all these things because I know I'll be taken care of and I'll store my energy and time into something that over time will buy me more. And that's why I'm so curious as to like, I found it so interesting what you were saying that like Gen Z kind of doesn't feel this hope for the future, especially financially, right? Like, and I wanted to get your take even a little more on like what are the differences you see between Gen Z and like maybe like your parents or your grandparents in terms of like how you see money? Do you think there's a difference between how you see money versus how your parents see money, for example?
I think most definitely.
Okay.
I think what happens now, I mean, I obviously won't speak for all of Gen Z, but I think a lot of people now in Gen Z spend a lot. They spend in a different way, but they spend more money than their parents did, in my opinion, right? So I think obviously you got a little bit more I mean, I'm not completely sure, but I feel like you did get a bit more for the money that you paid back then, right? Everything was relatively a little bit more understandably priced, even though it obviously was, I mean, the different classes still existed. However, the gap wasn't as big as it was now, right?
Yeah.
But I will say, I think the stigma that parents now have in terms of spending money, I think a lot of people in Gen Z are trying to break that. I think a lot of people in Gen Z, even a bit on a more like in a more spiritual way, are thinking more about experiences and kind of looking for how to spend that money in order to feel good and like be with community and be with friends. And I think a lot of adults don't really justify those purchases because it's not like, okay, you're not getting a specific job, you're not going to this college, you're not, you know what I mean? And I think also that's another point. I think a lot of people in Gen Z now are seeing money as more of a byproduct of trying to do something that you love. I think a lot of people in Gen Z are looking a bit more for fulfillment than financial kind of stability. Even though financial stability is more important now than ever, you know? I think a lot of people in Gen Z kind of like battle that with their parents of, I want to do this because it brings me joy, but then parents are like, no, but you have to study this because it brings you security.
Right.
So I would say that kind of back and forth, I'm privileged enough to feel like I always got support from my parents to be able to kind of do whatever I really wanted to do. But also, I'm also very aware and like clear that I will have to make money somehow. You know what I mean? It's like, it's still something that's like in the back of your head because you have to live somehow, right? So I would say that's the biggest thing. I wouldn't say a lot of adults are kind of all for like young people kind of going forward with their dreams. But I think when young people do, like now recently, kind of pursue their passions, they're finding ways to monetize in a way that works for them. Maybe they're not making millions, billions of dollars, but you see a lot more entrepreneurs. You see kind of the democratization of, you know, there's like a lower barrier of entry, I think, in a lot of fields now. And so for that reason, I think there's a huge kind of difference. I don't know if you see that too.
Totally, yeah, no, I agree. I mean, just the idea that you're like having a conversation like this and like people make money from TikTok and there's definitely a change in like professions and like what we do. I mean, it's a different society. Like that's undoubtedly with the good things and the bad things or whatever, the things to improve. That's actually, I like what you were mentioning of how they value experiences over, well, like maybe that's like a right way to say it or not, but imagine you value experiences over maybe like materialistic things. Like I don't need all these designer bags. I don't need a bunch of different things. I'd rather go take a trip to, I don't know where, South America, wherever. And I see it too. And I kind of like it. Like you said, I'm kind of on the cusp between Gen Z, Millennial, and I consider myself more Millennial because I grew up with everyone being a Millennial and like I just kind of see myself that way. But I definitely love the approach of being on TikTok a lot, like creating content, seeing things. Of course, it can get like, you know, like you can doom scroll and like there's a lot of negatives, but I kind of like how newer generations value more like genuineness.
100%.
And that's something that's so like inspiring in a way because you want to be a genuine person. I think deep down we all look to just be ourselves. Right. We want to just be and express that like version of ourselves. And in a way I'm not saying that it's all like that. I'm sure there's a lot of different things, but I like this approach of just like that fuck it mentality and just like be who you are and that's it. And like kind of embracing that. I think that's cool. And I think when it comes to money, I think that financial security that you're talking about, a lot of our parents or even our grandparents, I'll say our parents, I'll speak for our parents. I think it was just like the norm. Like you graduate, you have to get married.
Of course.
Buy a house, have a kid. And then like, but you see a lot of these divorce rates and you see a lot of different things and it like.
And the debt.
Right, and the debt. Yeah, I mean, not only are they in debt, they indebted all of us, right? Like, like our parents' generation and our grandparents' generation, like essentially indebted all of us. Like in the US, it's $37 trillion in debt. Like that's like almost 150K per person in debt in the US. Everywhere else in the world, it's very similar. And you think like, was it worth it, right? Like, if you ask a lot of like older people, I like talking to like people our parents' age or grandparents, a lot of them would say like, do they regret a lot of the things they did? Maybe not so much, but you know, because they know that life is life and like you're gonna make mistakes and you can improve. But a lot of them do mention like, would I have traveled more? Yes. Would I have like maybe not been so worried when I was 23 that I had to have everything figured out? Like, yeah, probably. You know, so I think it's good. I think every generation we're like getting better and better. And I think part of this conversation is how can we get better? How can we do better? How can we get the good things from before and then just make them better? And Yeah, I like this new generation.
I think that's super true because whenever I talk to adults, I think the one thing that I really, I don't know, I think it's also like a personal philosophy. I kind of live life trying to maximize it, not in the way of like productivity,
Yeah.
but kind of being open-minded enough to ask someone older for advice and like really take it to heart and not be
Right.
like, oh, I know better because I'm younger. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
it's easy to fall into that. And time again, when I ask people, for example, my parents' age or even older, like older people, you kind of lose that fear of judgment and that fear of kind of structure that you have when you're kind of younger. I think when you're my age, you're like, oh, I feel this all the
Yeah.
time. Like even if I have different beliefs, like it's natural. The feeling of, oh, I need to have it figured out. I need to know what I want to do. I need to start making money because like I'm about to get, like
Yeah.
once you are out of college, like you're talking about this yesterday, you're like, oh, like I need to get my stuff figured out. Like,
Yeah,
you know what I
for
mean? And time again, when I ask adults, they always say, like, I wish I would have lived more, right?
Yeah.
And I wish I would have kind of done the things that I wanted to do, pursued my passions. You see people in their 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s starting to do the things that they really love their whole
Yes.
life, And you ask people who have all this money and you're like, what are you passionate about? And they can't tell you because they never really got a chance to kind of cultivate those passions
So
that
true.
maybe you had as like the passions that your inner child has, right? And so I think that's super interesting because I think it kind of dictates, how do I put this? I think a lot of people in my generation are looking for that, and that's the hope that they're clinging
Right.
onto. You know what I
Interesting.
mean?
Yeah,
The
that's a good
hope
point.
of kind of being the generation that breaks that cycle and kind of going for the passions and that fuck it mentality
Yeah.
and just like going for it and then figuring out the money stuff later.
Interesting.
Because at the end of the day, a lot of people in Gen Z are also like, it's literally just paper. You know what I mean? So
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
they're like at the cusp of like,
Yeah,
you're like,
yeah.
you're almost there.
You're
Like,
almost there, right? Yeah.
Yeah. They're like, things are so expensive. It's literally almost paper. How does this work?
Yeah, and you know what I like? I think what I love about Gen Z, and like I would say millennials also started this, like you question things more.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's like, why is
100%.
this like even if it's like just in TikTok format or whatever, like the idea of questioning things
Yeah.
is just it's ingrained in like the DNA of this new generation. And I really love that because that's how you end up in this like, wait, but why it's literally just paper. Money isn't real, whatever, like
Yeah.
all this stuff. And I kind of want to get into you as an artist, as a creator, as someone who wants to like pursue a creative career. And I know I asked you this before, but in general, how do you see money playing into the way or the system? Even it doesn't even have to be money, just the system of how maybe it was before and how it could be today. Like when it comes to singing, making your own songs, and
Right.
like performing. Like how do you see the system today? How do you think it can improve? And how do you think money plays into that, like the system or this fiat system? If understanding a little bit more of the fiat system, do you think it plays certain roles, or do you think it's just just a byproduct and that's it?
So I think I can answer this more of in a kind of idea-based way. I think the structure of the music industry is very kind of focused on money and kind of optimizing your art for profitability, right? And when I answered earlier, I kind of answered what my personal relationship is to money within music. But I think something that I like in learning more about the music industry and how money plays into it, I think I've learned a bit more about. So I saw this all kind of started when I saw this talk by, his name is Jack Conte. He started Patreon,
Okay.
right? And he is also a music artist. And it's this talk called The Death of the Creator, right? And so, or the death of the follower. So he kind of gave this talk and he talks about how in reality, you have these corporations who you feel this within the general financial system. You have these corporations and these people kind of taking control of the money that people are making, right? And in the music industry, it's kind of the same thing. And so now there's this tendency for artists to feel like they prefer to be independent artists, to kind of look for funding and look for other ways of doing it, look for more crowdfunding. And we were kind of talking about this the other day. Look for other ways instead of taking on this debt with this huge music monster. You know what I mean? That kind of
Yeah.
I mean, I understand that in a lot of ways they do kind of want to make the music be heard, but at the end of the day, they want to make a profit. Like it's a business, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? And so for that reason, I would say my relationship to it, to answer your question, is I'm really preferring the approach of the one-on-one kind of, this person, I mean, I'm still not like within the world, but I prefer this person likes my music. Okay, let's see how we can kind of make them feel special and put them into this community so that there can be this like sort of mutual support instead of let me kind of take on this debt with this corporation so that they can finance what I'm doing and then treat it like a business, you know? Like I think it makes the art a bit more sacred when you kind of get out of the system and have more one-on-one exchanges, which usually don't have anything to do with money really. It's an experience exchange, you know what I mean? So I would say that's kind of my experience with it. I know you're not in the music industry, but I think you can see that kind of that shift away from big corporations, big companies into more kind of community-based, more helping, more mutual aid kind of situations, right?
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that because my experience with, for example, with TikTok is like, I'm not a singer or anything, but when I see how people blow up, like singers, and maybe some are just like one-hit wonders, but like you see like people create communities by like just posting online. Like that was definitely not possible like 20 years ago. I don't know. I mean, I guess the whole Sony, Spotify thing also showed like a different side of the industry that I was interested in. But if you see like how, I mean, you see it more than anyone, I'm sure. It's so inspiring in a way that like you can kind of, you don't really need much to start. You can just have a guitar, you film yourself singing on the street, and now you can just become like Justin Bieber. You know what I mean? Like even that was like the original, the OG. And then even with TikTok and everything, or even Instagram, everything, it just feels like, wow, that's so like cool that you can, like, we have like the world at our fingertips, and it's just a matter of how you use it. I really think that's cool, and I love that you would take that approach. I think that would be great because you have so much potential, and I think you're gonna do amazing.
Thank you.
I think, like the sky's the limit for you. So I think that's really good. Do you know where your money is right now?
So, yes, it's being lended to other people.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're part of like 1% of people who actually know and like consciously know that. Do you know who it's lent to?
No, actually.
Do you know to how many people it's lent to?
No.
So that's the part where people talk about, yeah, my money, this. Is it really your money when you're sharing that money with like 10 other people, 9 other people?
Yeah.
I think it's important to just even talk about it, even just understanding this, even if you don't do anything about it. It's just something so crucial for people to know where their money is. Like people just, think about it, you work thousands of hours for something that you don't end up understanding who makes that currency and how they make it and what it's backed by. And then you also don't know where you store it and who's keeping it, like where it is. But I just find it so crazy. I don't know if like people in general know this. Like maybe they kind of hear about it, but they really don't know. Like today in the US, I'll talk about the US because it's the system I know the most, the banking system, but most banking systems in the world are the same.
Right.
Almost all of them actually. It's called the fractional reserve banking system. What that means is that you only need to have a fraction of that money that you put in to actually like be able to lend out the rest. And this fractional reserve system is something that it's powerful because that's actually how money's created. When I tell you money's printed, one of the big, like I think one of the most important ways, or the most like, let's say, one of the most important ways that money printing happens is via lending out money, your money. It's a kind of multiplier effect on your money. So if you put like, let's say you have $10,000, you work a lot of hours, you save $10,000, you have it in your bank. Well, that $10,000 then that bank goes and then they can lend $9,000 of it to someone else. And then that other person who gets that $9,000, they can also lend another 90% of that to more and more people. And usually you have this like 10x effect or 9x effect where banks have the ability to lend out as much as they can from the reserves they have. So you think you have $10,000, there's actually $1,000 of collateral there. The rest is being lent out to 9 other people. And you think about it, you're like, okay, well, what happens if I go and try to take my money out? Well, you probably could. Great, you can take it out. But what if everybody, all those 9 or 10 people want to go and take out their money? Well, who's going to get the 10K? You know, like who's, right? And that's where you have these bank runs, and it happens everywhere. In the US, it kind of happened in 2023 with Silicon Valley Bank, and like it was about to be a shit show. The only reason this whole system doesn't collapse is because the government can just print money and bail people out. That's what happened in 2008, and that's what keeps on happening.
Yeah.
And when you see like FDIC insured this, or like, yeah, you feel safe because, you know, if the bank goes out of business, then the government's just going to bail them out, right? Bail me out. But is that really a good system to live in, right? Where you have these like boom and bust, but they don't let it bust. They don't let things go down to normal. They just keep up inflating, and there's a point where it just pops.
And it's like, what money is the government using to bail them out?
Exactly. Your money, you just don't know it.
Exactly.
And like they'll have reserves and this and that, but if they ever really had to bail out, they print a lot more money to bail you out, but they're actually like fucking everybody else over in the process, even yourself. So that money that you're going to receive, yeah, you're going to get your 10K back, but maybe that's only worth like 9 or 8K of what it used to be. So it's like over time, it just erodes. And that's actually why you have the wealth gap, right? You have a wealth gap where you, over time, as that difference between, the most important thing people have to understand, why the rich get richer and why, let's say, like other people kind of either get poorer, is it all has to do with assets, like where you put that money. Those people who put their money to work, essentially, or who own like assets that actually appreciate or like they don't devalue over time, those are the people who are kind of better off. And the people who earn a salary, who get in debt and don't actually save money or invest their money, those are the people who end up being worse off because it's just worth less and less over time. Like your money could lose 10% of its value in a year, maybe 2 years, but your salary isn't going to go, most people's salary isn't going to go up by 10% every year. That's not realistic, but money does get printed, or like M2, or like the amount of money that comes into circulation does go up by that amount. I just wanted to touch on that because I think it's important for people to understand. And that's one of the biggest reasons you opt out of a system via Bitcoin, is because you don't have to worry about that. You just save your money in a currency that's working for you, and you can let the system like do whatever you want. Like, you know, you want to print money, fine, like do it, but you're not doing it with my money or with my time. And it's just important. Like the fractional reserve system, I just thought it was important to touch on because I feel like most people don't know where their money is, and it's with 9 other people right now.
Yeah.
That's where it is. And actually, another thing I wanted to touch on was when it comes to investing, finances, in like being a woman, right? Like I know back in the day, even like our mothers, our grandmother, well, definitely our grandmother, we share the same grandmother.
Yeah.
Like I don't think she even ever had a debit card, or like, I don't think she maybe she handled cash to like pay some like groceries, but like, how do you think that's changed over time? And how do you think we can empower more women, more than today, even though it might be today a certain period? Like what role do you think this could play for women in general?
I think there's still a long way to go in terms of kind of feeling that equality, because obviously women still don't get paid as much as men and all that, which we all know. But I think in recent years, what I've loved to see is more young women kind of taking control of their finances. We come from the same family, and like I was always told that the guy kind of takes care of everything, not even in the guy pays for everything kind of way, like that too, but like you're not seeing the money. Like there's money coming to the family, you don't know how much it is. You know what I mean?
I know.
And at a very young age, well, my mom is such an independent woman, and like she built her own business from scratch, and like now she makes her own money and she's well off because she kind of built that. And seeing her kind of rise to that, coming from what I knew within the family, it was kind of like they were kind of butting heads, you know what I mean? And I think I had to kind of be that person for myself to be like, no, I think the woman also has to see what's going on, because also like you were mentioning this earlier, how the guy isn't just enough anymore. Like both people have to work, yes or yes, in this economy, like, you know what I mean? And so for that reason, it's like the woman also needs, I mean, we're obviously speaking in like hetero terms, but like, you know, with a man and a woman in the house, like the woman has to be aware of what's going on, because naturally in this world she's going to be putting money into contributing like monthly.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so I think most of what I found in terms of empowerment is learning. And I think this goes for literally anything, but to become empowered, I think kind of first of all switching the little brain, like changing the switch in our brains that makes us think this is just for men and like finance talk is just for men. And kind of also putting a bit more resources and support into the women making finance content, because I think a lot of times, even when I talk about it with my dad, you know, not to put him on blast, but like just in general, talking about it with men, I feel like they are talking down on me.
Yeah.
And sometimes I'm like, no, I think I know more than you.
Yeah, wait,
you know?
I have to add after the huge disclaimer, like you're one of the brightest like women I've met.
Thank you.
Even people,
Thank
not
you,
just
thank
women or men, like in especially for your age, like the just like context, like when we first started, this was so surprised. Like we hadn't talked in so many years. Like for me, you're always like a little Ale, and then I guess for you, I was just like your older cousin.
Yeah.
But it was so inspiring and like a great experience, a great like surprise to see like you already had like, yeah, I already set up my 401k, my IRA, not 401k, like my IRA, retirement account. I already looked into investing. I understand compounding effects, this and that. And you're just like, whoa, like, yeah, like you get it. Like,
Yeah.
you're smarter than most men, like really. Like, apart from you being smarter, you're also more educated than most men. And then it's such a inspiring thing to see, because I think it's like you're saying, right? It has to do with information being available for people
100%.
now. And I think more than, like now when you see that so much information is available, it's just a matter of like curiosity, right? I think maybe some women are a little bit less drawn into it.
Of course.
And you know, that's fine. It's like I might be less drawn to certain things that maybe other men are drawn into, like, you know, like, I don't know, like home repairs and things like that. Like people like, you know, like I say like Home Depot's like the Toys R Us for men, like that. Not for me, you know? So I think one of the reasons I'm even asking you this is because I think it's so important, the role that women play in the household, not the role that, like, let's say like the whole gender role, like, oh no, they have to maintain the house and all that. Like I think we're at an age where you can kind of do all of the above, really.
100%.
Like you can literally do all of the above. And I think one of the unspoken roles of women before, even like my grandmother or maybe my mom or anything, it's kind of keeping the household grounded in a way, because men, we do feel like this need to like provide, and like part of that, I think part of the greed men sometimes feel, or ambition, comes from that like provider mentality.
Right.
I'm not saying women don't have it, and I'm sure they do too. It's just ingrained like genetically, and it just feels like sometimes that drives greed a little too much. And it's always a good balance to have like more of a feminine or like a female influence that's just saying like, no, like, you know, and it's actually leads me to my point where the people I've talked to about Bitcoin, and like, because that's just what I love and stuff, it's always the women who get it most and who do better. And when I say do better, I don't mean like, yeah, they bought this like coin and it went up like 1,000 times and now they're rich. It's not that. It's like they genuinely get the long-term horizon. They understand the balance of like, why would you want to hold Bitcoin over other cryptocurrencies or other, like, let's say like more speculative, like they're easier to differentiate between like, this is like a real asset that I should hold over time, a real currency I should hold over time, more than like a speculative investment.
Right.
They're also not so inclined to be like, yeah, I need to trade my way in and out, and like they just get it. It just clicks easier. And when I used to do like one-on-one like coaching and stuff like that, or like one-on-one like talks with people about like this whole space, most of the people who even looked for help were women. And what surprised me was they weren't looking for help when it was like, when everything was peaking and the hype bubble. It was like actually during the bottom, like when Bitcoin was at like 20K and stuff like that. And like, we're filming this today in like, I don't know, February 2025, whoever watches this later on, I don't know what Bitcoin's price is, but like it was 20K, 16K. And I remember I was like, wow, this is like, I would tell them like, the fact that you're even asking about this now or talking about this or curious about this now, it just shows that you genuinely know the importance of this.
Yeah.
And like that you can handle your emotions better when it comes to investing. That's why I think I would invite any women who watch this or anything to just kind of get involved and don't feel like they're out of
Yeah.
it. I think I've also seen it with my sister, with Cristi, like your
100%.
cousin. Like, she's very smart, and like at first she was like, no, like, you know, she just, it doesn't really interest her that much. But I think now she's realized the importance of kind of having that financial stability or that financial independence, so that she can do whatever, like that fuck it mentality. You can do whatever you want and don't rely on a man or whatever.
Yeah.
And I just think I think it's really good. I really feel so optimistic about like the future for also for women and adapting, and like how this new system can really like equal that playing field that you're talking about, and also kind of like give tools that for you to use them however you want to use them, right?
100%.
You're not tied into a system. You kind of make your own, right? So I think that's really cool.
I think that's something that really interested me when you explained how it is an algorithm and there can't be control over
Yeah.
it, because I think
Exactly.
the first thing I really think of when it comes to like the social aspect of it is obviously kind of different parts of the world and like how people in different
Yeah.
kind of classes can use it, because that's like main priority, I would say. Like I think a lot of things kind of come back to class and money. But then I thought about it in the way of, okay, who's in control, because I want to make sure everyone in different classes is okay, but also who's in control to make sure that minorities are okay.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like there can't be
Yeah.
the white guy at the top. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
that was my kind of fear. I was like, okay, what white guy is going to control it now, right? But then when you explained it to me as something that is algorithmic and like there's actually no way for someone to have control over it, that's what kind of clicked for me. And I was like, oh, this is like, this could actually be a way out. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I also want to like add on to that even with like the system we have today, I think a lot of times like the word capitalism gets a bad rap, or free market gets a bad rap.
Yeah.
I think we haven't really seen a free market. There's someone called Jeff Booth. He's really smart. He has a book called The Price of Tomorrow. He essentially talks about like this concept that like things should be getting cheaper over time. And what I think it's so interesting is that we haven't seen a real free market. What you think is a free market is actually manipulated by a system. They tell you, hey, let's play in this system, right? But in reality, it's not free. They make you feel like it's free, but there's actually people manipulating under, and you don't let things, like if it was a free market, when there's a bubble, it pops. In this case, they just got to keep it up and they keep inflating it. And
they keep inflating it.
They keep inflating it, yeah, totally. And it's like, imagine you're playing a game of Monopoly, right? We've all played Monopoly. Imagine you're playing a game of Monopoly and then you're playing with like 5 other people. And then you're like the banker, the person who controls the money or the currency that pays people out, he's friends with like 2 other people. And then you and another person are just like bystanders, but you're just playing, you just met them. Imagine every time you pass through Go, they give you 200, right?
Yeah.
Imagine every time you pass through Go, they give you 200, but then the banker goes and gives 300 to his friends, just because.
Yeah.
Maybe at first you don't notice the difference, but in a while from there, you're like, wait, how are you, like they buy up all your properties you have, and then how did you even get all that money to buy it? Like, what? And it just turns out that you're just playing a flawed game. Like you're already destined to lose when you're playing in a system that's working against you. And that's where I'm saying you're not in a free market. You feel like, yeah, you have the option to buy or sell your home. Like, yeah, you might think that's capitalism, but that's like, no, that's another thing.
That's a great point, because as someone who kind of got into the world of politics a bit later, I think it's something that I'm super, super passionate about because of the social aspect. It's not as much of like like the actual politics and economy of it, but how it affects people, literally. And I never really found a solution, you know? Like I looked at different political systems and I was like, okay, how has this worked out in history? How would this work in theory and in practice? I took a lot of classes in college. I mean, I still haven't graduated, but still. And I think there are certain aspects of capitalism. I think I rejected capitalism as a whole for a long time. And I think a lot of people do, just because they're like, this isn't working.
Exactly.
Like, you know? But when we talked about Bitcoin and the ways in which capitalism can be kind of altered, and maybe more so like how it can become a system that can play out in the way that it was supposed to. You know what I mean? Because I think it absolutely didn't, like how you're mentioning. So I think in that way, I think what I was open-minded about that. And so when you talked to me about Bitcoin, I was like, this might be the missing link. You know what I mean?
I agree with you completely. And by the way, I'm not saying that like, oh, capitalism is everything is perfect and socialism or whatever isn't. Like, I mean, clearly we come from Venezuela. Like, I would argue also, and like anybody who knows me knows I'm like super like obviously like free markets. I consider myself a libertarian. Like I think socially do whatever you want, whatever. And I think maybe like, you know, when it comes to like money and stuff, like let's be like frugal about like how we spend our money and not just finance wars and a bunch of stuff that we don't need to. But I think there's something to be said that like even socialism in other places hasn't been done correctly. It's just corruption. Like it's just fair. Like it's just to be fair to the whole spectrum of politics. That's why I love Bitcoin, because people think usually Bitcoin is for finance bros who are like right wing and whatever. No, dude, it's for everyone. It's the most socially progressive thing that there is. If you really want to advance a society, you have to fix the system that's broken. And if people think that with a way of fixing it is just electing someone that's going to fix your problems, but he can't because he doesn't fix the system. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I'm not saying it's like a perfect fix for every problem in the world, but it's definitely a giant leap forward. It's definitely a big step forward. And it lays the foundation for you to actually live in like a real world that isn't like constantly or artificially like suppressed or inflated.
I think that's a great point you're bringing up, because I think in the world of politics, it's very easy to say, oh, this doesn't work, this doesn't work. Yeah. But at the end of the day, it's like when you go into how it's been put in practice, you're like, of course not, because they didn't do what the theory actually was, right? And so I think it's so interesting that Bitcoin is kind of like, it levels the playing field 100%. In a way. Because you can have someone, like I can see someone on the complete left of the spectrum being like, this is what we need. 100%. And then someone completely on the right. Yes. Because also at the end of the day, in economic things and even like in political things, both in politics or in economic things, I think people are more in line than they think, right? Like this is something that I never really understood, but because in the US, it's so easy to be polarized, to fall into the like, right versus left, right? But then when you go in and you talk to people, they just want to live and be able to eat and be able to spend time with family and be able to do what they love. You know what I mean? And that's not a crazy ask, you know? Yeah,
and I think part of that polarization that you're talking about of like, it's a byproduct of this system that's working against you. So you feel this friction, you feel like nothing's working, and then like, it's normal, we're humans. You feel like something's not working, like you try to find like the solution. Some people find the right side, some people find the left side, but it's all the same. It's really all the same. Yeah, I think there is something to be said about Bitcoin being more of a social thing than a financial thing.
100%.
And it's also not so much because of Bitcoin, it's also because people forget that money is a social construct. It's a social agreement, social consensus we all have saying like, we're gonna use this as our money. And it's a powerful tool, I think, for equality, because I think we can all agree math isn't racist, math isn't discriminatory, math, it's just math. Right. You know what I mean?
Right.
And I think part of that is why you can feel that that's an equal playing field, and there's no preference over white people, black people, whatever. Like there's nothing. It's just math. It's just algorithm. It's just an equal playing field, like you're saying. So I think
for that reason, I think if more people in Gen Z were to kind of understand the social aspect of Bitcoin, I think they would find, kind of circling back to what you originally asked me, I think they could find that hope, you know, for the future. Because it feels disheartening. But then when you find out that there's actually other people who are trying to fix the problem and there are solutions that exist, I think at the end of the day, it's just a matter of, I mean, like people are always going to be more powerful than the government or the people in power, you know what I mean? It's like if El Pueblo comes together, you know what I mean?
Totally. Yeah, it's like a bottom-up approach instead 100%. Of top-down. Like that's like we were saying, you were born, they force you to use a currency but like with this, that's why it's so great. People just think it's just a grassroots movement. It was just some person, Satoshi Nakamoto, no one knows who he or she or they are, and they just created this thing, and then came out of it like one of like the most important revolutions of our lifetime, I would assume. So yeah, no, I'm really happy we had this combo. I think it's really good. It was really good. Quickly, before I guess we have like the minutes, is there any misconception? Is there something you think we missed?
No, I think
Good.
In terms of misconceptions, when I asked you the
Okay.
questions, like 100%.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Good. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Really happy we did this.
Me too.